Hello and welcome to today's virtual experience from the Kentucky Historical Society. Over the last several weeks, we've explored the buildings and exhibitions on our campus here in Frankfort and toured sections of our main exhibition called A Kentucky Journey. That's where I am right now. Today, however, we will examine the Depression era. Although we are closed to on-site visitors, we offer an array of virtual programs and online resources to educate and engage with you through Kentucky history. My name is Greg, and I'm your voice today. So be sure to ask lots of questions and let me know you're here. Also responding to your questions and providing more information in the comment section is our Kentucky history advocate, Stuart Sanders. We're so glad you've joined us today. Our guide today is Museum Programs Coordinator, Carol Bolton Easterly.
Hi everybody, it's good to see you again. I want to say that I miss seeing you in person, but very glad to be able to connect with you via Facebook Live like this. Welcome. I'm going to be taking you through the section of our exhibit that focuses on the Depression era in Kentucky. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background, the Depression it started in 1929 with a stock market crash. And so lots of people that had invested money in the stock market lost it. Banks failed, people lost money like that. And businesses were going out and having to lay off employees or let them go. And so lots and lots of people lost their jobs. It was a really, really hard time here in Kentucky, but actually across the United States as well, and even around the world. Where people didn't have money for buying food and paying heating their houses and things like that. It was a very, very difficult time. But the government stepped in a way that they had never done before in U.S. history with a series of legislation called the New Deal. And the New Deal actually brought a lot of change to Kentucky. And so it kind of is a very interesting time period in Kentucky history to talk about. So we're gonna tackle that today. I welcome your questions. If you want to step into the tobacco barn with me here.
Here, I'm going to step back and give them a bigger view. I don't know if they got a chance to see that, but since you aren't here in person, I'll give you a bigger view of the tobacco barn that we're stepping into.
So we're starting here because in 1929 and throughout the 30s, most Kentuckians actually lived in rural locations. It wasn't until the 1970s that more Kentuckians started living in more urban areas. So lots of folks were farmers, might have had barns very much like this. And farms in Kentucky were hit pretty hard by the Depression. You can see some of the tools and stuff that they might have used up here on the wall. These are tobacco knives and a tobacco setter. Some other things over here. But for the problems that actually started much earlier in Kentucky, agricultural prices were falling, so farmers weren't getting very much for their products. Even tobacco, which had always been a reliable cash crop because people liked to smoke cigarettes a lot back then. It was a very popular thing to do. Didn't know about the health risks back then quite as much, but tobacco had always been a very reliable cash crop for that reason. But even during the Depression, tobacco prices started to fall. And of course, Prohibition had happened, and so that had already killed off one of Kentucky's major industries of production of bourbon. And so things already weren't good. And then the stock market crash and bank failures and all of that began. So farmers were hit hard because they had trouble selling their products. There were too many products in the market, which actually still happens today. And so as part of the New Deal legislation, the government stepped in and created the Farm Administration. And it helped. They actually paid farmers not to grow certain products to try to help keep the markets from getting too glutted. They also set up experimental programs to help farmers learn to diversify their crops and use their land in different ways. Another reason that farm life was tough prior to the New Deal is that a lot of folks in rural areas didn't have electricity. It's kind of weird to think about today, we're so dependent on it. But even as recently as the 1930s, many Kentuckians did not have electricity in their homes. So this kitchen that the display behind me, this is kind of like what a kitchen might have been like before electricity. You can see the wood burning stove over there. Imagine cutting wood every day and having to stoke a fire just to cook a meal for your family. There's an iron heating on the stove. They had to heat up an iron just with the heat of the stove to be able to iron clothes. This cabinet back here, we call this a Hoosier cabinet. And in those days, it was a very inexpensive factory-made piece of furniture that you could store your things in. There's a flour bin and sifter included as well. If you look for one of these things on Facebook Marketplace or eBay today, they are not inexpensive anymore. Lots of people want them, I think probably just because of nostalgia. They remember them from Grandma's kitchen, you know.
So I'm curious, of our viewers that are out there, how many of you have grown up on a Kentucky farm and might recognize some of the tools that you saw in the barn, or have maybe perhaps you grew up during the Depression era, or your parents did and have heard stories about what it's like? Comment in the comment section so we'll know.
Yes, please. My grandma used to tell me stories about the Depression. So our mannequin right here is using a butter churn. It's a hand cranked butter churn. So this family probably had cows on their farm that they would milk every day, and then she's using that to make butter through that churn. Have any of you guys ever made your own butter? It's actually pretty easy to do. Tastes lovely, but they would churn the milk into butter, and then this kind of wooden square right here, that's a butter mold. So they would mold the butter into rectangles right there for storage. So lots and lots of work required to maintain a home with no electricity. But as part of the New Deal, the Rural Electrification Project was created. And that brought electricity, as I mentioned, into many Kentuckians' homes for the very first time. And so they were able to take advantage of many of the more kind of modern conveniences that had been developing throughout the early 20th century. So one of my favorite artifacts actually that we have is this Ringer washing machine that you can see down here.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
There we go. So I just really like old gadgets. So I love this thing. This is a washing machine from like the 30s or 40s. And this was an improvement over previous methods of doing laundry, where you just have to scrub your clothes on a washboard in some really hot water and then hang them up. This washing machine, you'd have to fill it with water, like at your sink, okay? Put your clothes and your soap in, and then it's electric, so you would turn it on and it would do all the agitation, but there's not like a spin cycle. So you'd have to take your wet clothes out and then put them through this thing right here. This is a wringer. And these 2 pounds that you see, those would squeeze the water out of your clothes. And then you could rinse them and squeeze them again and hang them up to dry. Now, that made things easier. It made your drying time faster. You didn't have to crank this or anything, so it was pretty nice. But these things are really, really dangerous. I've heard many stories about people getting their fingers caught in there and getting hurt really, really badly. So, trade-offs: convenience, danger. But there's also some other wonderful appliances that we've got right over here that suddenly these farm families could take advantage of. Nice electric fan right there to cool you off when it's hot outside. Nobody had air conditioning yet at this point, I don't believe. But having a nice fan to get a breeze going in your house in the summer was certainly an improvement. Now, we saw our mannequin hand churning butter over there. This is an electric butter churn right there. So she could just plug it into the wall and let it go.
So Patty Vance, one of our followers here, says she has one of the hand churns.
Oh, fancy.
So I'm wondering, did you use the hand churn when you were a kid, or did your parents use it? And do you remember, if you did, do you remember perhaps the day when you got an electric churn?
So that's pretty cool.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I'm sure these farm wives really appreciated not having to work quite so hard for butter. A couple of other things down here. We saw the iron heating on the stove in the older kitchen. This is an electric iron right here. You could just plug it in and it would heat right up. So no more having to put it on the stove. This is an electric clock. I love the design of this thing. It's very, very Art Deco. But yeah, you could reliably know what time it was whenever. Now, of course, you recognize behind them this radio. Radio had grown in popularity throughout the 1920s, and when folks got electricity as part of the New Deal, these rural families were actually able to enjoy radio programs as well. So they could get news much faster, stay on top of what was going on, enjoy the entertainment, listen as a family in the evening. Radio was very, very popular in those days, so they could enjoy that for the first time.
So if you've ever listened to any of those old shows from the 20s and 30s, they're very creative in the way that they use sound and the Foley. It's just, it captures my imagination.
That's really cool.
Patty said the antique butter churn that she has that looks a bit like this one, she got at an auction, but she still does use it to make homemade butter.
Oh, cool. Very nice. I do want to mention one other thing before we head around. Families who were trying to get through the Depression on not much money had to make do with a lot of, with not much. And so they would save things and use whatever they could. So some flour companies got the idea that they would start making their flour sacks out of pretty fabric to get women to want to buy their flour. And so you might see fabric, your flour might come in a bag that looks something like this. And so women would collect this fabric and then use it to make clothing for themselves, for their children, maybe quilts, different things that they needed. So flour sack dresses, very, very common thing you'd see during the Depression.
You know, today we kind of think of ourselves as being like really forward thinking as far as recycling and repurposing and all of that. But man, all of that really begins in the Depression.
I think you're right about that, absolutely. We could learn a thing or two from our grandmothers. I want to point out this picture right here as well. This is a picture from our collection. This is a hardware store, I think it's in Frankfurt. I thought it was in Louisville. And it's just kind of, he's got like this figure of a man hanging in the doorway, and it says hanging of old man depression there. So they kind of personified their difficulties in the person of old man depression and mistreated him here. It was kind of a way of making light of the situation and just expressing that frustration with the economic woes. And here is a washing machine.
Hey, look at that. Looks just like the one we just saw.
Yep.
It really does. It looks very almost identical.
Yeah.
Oh, but this one looks like it has it does. It has like a motor on the bottom. Mm-hmm. So this may have been a gas-powered washing machine.
Gas-powered ones. So I've told you about a couple of New Deal programs, the Farm Administration, the Rural Electrification Project, but there were lots and lots more. So I want to mention a few of those. One of the things, a great program that was very, very popular here in Kentucky was the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC as it was just known as. And in the CCC, the government would hire men to come and work on conservation projects. They helped to reforest areas of the state. This picture right here shows some CCC workers actually planting trees at General Butler State Park.
It's up in Carrollton. Let us know if you're from that area.
Yeah. And there were CCC camps actually all over Kentucky. If you've ever been down to Lake Cumberland State Park, that's one, or not Lake Cumberland, excuse me, Cumberland Falls State Park, that's one of my favorites. The beautiful lodge there at Cumberland Falls was actually built during the New Deal. I think that was a Works Progress Administration project. If you've ever been out to Kentucky Lake, the Tennessee Valley Authority was another New Deal organization. They built several dams and locks along the Tennessee River, which borders Kentucky and Tennessee. And part of it was to help control flooding. There had been a really terrible flood in 1937, and they wanted to get better control over that. And it also made the river more navigable. But when they created this dam, built this dam across the river, it created a giant lake right there, which they ended up calling Kentucky Lake. And now, of course, there is a state park there, and it's a lovely recreational kind of area. So that's an example from out in Western Kentucky of how the New Deal was active. So there was the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Tennessee Valley Authority. There was also the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and they did a lot of construction all over Kentucky. Bridges were a very common thing that WPA workers would build. This is a picture of Pauley Bridge down in Pike County. That was a WPA project. That is still there. You can go walk across it. Schools were another project that the WPA took on. This is West Liberty High School in Morgan County. I was reading about one today that is it was Hitchens High School, which is in what county is it in? Carter County, excuse me. And it's not the high school anymore, but it's still a school. It's actually the Carter Christian Academy today. So it's still in use, still a school, which is kind of cool. And so all of these projects were going on throughout Kentucky. And it was really helpful because workers were hired to do this. So they had jobs, and then they had money to spend in the economy, which is really important. But also, Kentucky couldn't really have afforded to do these projects that were needed. They couldn't have afforded it before. And so communities were able to get really important work done to help improve things during this time. And so it really kind of made Kentucky look different. A lot of roads were paved as well. I forgot to say that. There were still dirt roads all over Kentucky prior to the Great Depression. So another WPA project was paving some of those roads.
Yeah, Justin Mays says that let me get to it. Yeah, his grandma and great uncles were in the CCC.
Oh, nice.
And Patty Vance said the WPA did a lot of work in Leslie County where she lives. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm sure there's lots of followers out there that are connecting with this content here.
I'm going to show you guys one of these. This is a copy of, it's a CCC camp newsletter. And we have several of these in our collection. This is from this is the Camp Cromwell Cardinal. It's the name of the newsletter. Camp Cromwell was out in the Henderson area of Kentucky, and they named it after Emma Guy Cromwell, who was the director of state parks at this time. And part of what they did was to create what is now the Audubon State Park, John James Audubon State Park out in Henderson. And that beautiful lodge out there that looks like a French chateau, that was also built by the WPA. So some other projects were more artistic. This is a model of Liberty Hall here in Frankfort, and this was created as part of the Historic American Buildings Survey. The government hired architects and draftsmen who were out of work to go and basically catalog historically important locations across the country. And so a number of places in Kentucky, including the old state capitol here in Frankfort and Liberty Hall, as we see, were documented as part of the Historic American Buildings Survey. In some cases, artists were paid to do murals, much like this one, at state parks, at post offices, different places like that. So that is a depiction of General George Rogers Clark, well-known figure in Kentucky history. And it looks like he's gathering his troops there to march west.
So this one was once in the Capitol Hotel here in Frankfort.
Yeah, and that was done. It was commissioned in 1934, so this is right out of that era. Absolutely.
Sorry, Justin, your grandpa, not your grandma. Sorry about that.
Now, I mentioned also that some families, or maybe I didn't mention this, I don't know, some families actually they had to leave their homes because they couldn't afford to pay their mortgage or their rent anymore. And so there were also efforts to help with that. The New Deal created the Federal Housing Authority or Administration, I can't remember what the A stands for, the FHA, which still exists today. To help people get loans for their home. My first house was an FHA loan, so
mine too.
Personally, yes, we still benefit from the programs that were created by the New Deal. And this picture right here shows a lady in an apartment that was a WPA project to create some low-cost housing in, it looks like Lexington. And so, yeah, that's Frankfurt. So it tried to help both buyers and renters find housing that was affordable. Now,
Melinda King's Baum said her granddaddy King, great Pawpaw Logston, and a second cousin named Raymond all worked for the WPA project. They built a bridge across Highway 259 south near Bear Creek Road in Grayson County. They said they made $2.50 a day.
That was good money back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, her cousin said it was the best paying job he ever had.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I read something today about how in some areas farmers complained that they couldn't hire any help because the WPA paid too well. Again, trade-offs. So the gentleman who was really considered responsible for all of this legislation to help was Franklin D. Roosevelt, and you see him right here on the left. He was elected president in 1932, took office in March of 1933. And he won in a landslide. His predecessor was Herbert Hoover, and people were really critical of Hoover because they felt like he hadn't really done much to try to respond and make things better. So that's a depiction of Hoover right there. Not super flattering. But Roosevelt won in a landslide. Kentucky was pretty reliably Democratic in those days, and they certainly did vote for President Roosevelt. And he immediately jumped into action. On his very first day in office, he declared a bank holiday to try to slow down some of the banking failures that had been happening. So he did that and then proceeded to work with Congress to pass as much legislation as they could. Sometimes when you hear about a president's first 100 days in office, comes from President Roosevelt and all of the actions that he took in that first 100 days. Now, Kentucky had a very popular senator in those days, Alvin Barkley, who you can see a bust of him right here, as well as his picture. And so he helped to kind of funnel some of that New Deal money and projects here into Kentucky. But then he actually became vice president under Harry S. Truman. And so after Roosevelt passed away. So in the 40s, a Kentuckian was vice president, and another one of those man-made lakes out in the western part of the state is Lake Barkley, named after him. So that's another vestige of the New Deal that we still see. It's kind of interesting to think about the New Deal as we consider some of the things that are happening in our country even right now. We know that lots of folks, of course, unfortunately have lost jobs or been laid off because of the efforts because of the quarantines in an effort to slow down the spread of the coronavirus. And there's been different actions taken by Congress to try to inject money into the economy. Stimulus checks have gone out, and there's been just different actions that they've taken to try to help things not get really bad. And all of that kind of action that Congress has been taking, that really has its precedence in the New Deal. Because this was really the first time that the federal government got involved to this kind of degree in trying to help the economy, and it really became, the government was more involved in people's everyday lives than it ever had been. Even the things that we experience today and some of the things that we benefit from today have their roots in the New Deal. So I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with us today. I'd love more questions or comments if you have any. Greg, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, well, just thank you. If you do have questions, go ahead and post them while I wrap up here, and I'll be sure to ask them of Carol before we let go today. I'll continue monitoring the channel for about an hour or so afterwards, so if you have any questions, we'll try to answer those. I want to thank Stuart Sanders, our history advocate, for answering questions in the comments. He's added a lot of links in the comments to some of the things that Carol's talked about, so you can go back after and and take a look at the comments and click through the links and see some of these artifacts in a little bit better condition. Again, we just want to thank you for joining us today. Our next tour is going to be this Thursday, where we will visit the Hall of Governors. So make sure you follow us on social media. Consider becoming a member of the Kentucky Historical Society to support programming like this. You can visit our webpage, history.ky.gov/virtual visitor, and that's just kind of a one-stop shop for all of our online resources. We've got videos, and all of our live tours are embedded on that page. Lots of great content there. Let's see, let me go back and take a look. Any last minute questions? You're welcome, Justin. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Patty. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And Melinda, we appreciate all of your comments, folks, and the stories that you tell, because it just brings it to life for us. One of the things that we miss the most is you guys.
Can't wait to have you back.
Yeah, so doing these tours is just one way that we can kind of connect with you all a little bit and hear your stories, because we really do. It makes it the world to us. So I think we've answered all the questions. Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe and healthy at home, and go Team Kentucky.